Hello, I'm Robin. Welcome to Bookspin. Today, let's take a look at Norstrilia, Cordwainer Smith's one and only science fiction novel. This is a story that is set in the Instrumentality of Mankind universe, which is a future history mostly comprised of short stories, each one of which I am gradually reading and reviewing in turn on my channel. And Norstrilia is number 22 on the list. And true to form, as with all of Cordwainer Smith's work, this is a very strange and quirky story. It's full of strange imagery and eccentric characters, far-fetched world building, and wild sci-fi ideas that get thrown at the reader at a dizzying pace. So if you've read any of Smith's short stories before, you can have an idea of the weirdness to expect. But without the usual constraints of short-form magazine fiction, Smith really goes to town with these crazy ideas in this one. That said, if we look at the publication history of this novel, prior to it becoming a full novel, it was in fact published in two shorter novellas. The first of these was titled The Boy Who Bought Old Earth, and this was published in Galaxy, April 1964, and this was followed by part 2, which is called The Store of Heart's Desire, in If magazine, May 1964. So these two texts were then expanded upon and published as two short novels called The Planet Buyer and The Underpeople, published in 1964 and 1968 respectively. And then in 1975, these novels were combined into a single volume, Norstrilia, which is the definitive text that we have today. Now in this story, we follow a protagonist called Rod McMahon from the planet Old North Australia, aka Norstrilia, which is an immensely rich world that is the home of the immortality drug Stroon that prolongs human lifespan. And the way that this substance is produced is through sheep farming. But these are no ordinary sheep. These are a kind of a special type of contaminated sheep that's bloated to a massive size. And the sheep have to be kept in this diseased state to carry on producing the drug. And this is only possible in Norstrilia's planetary conditions, and thus the whole planet has monopolized stream production, this being the one thing that everyone in the universe wants to buy. And it's got a 20 million% import duty. That is where we start Rod's story. Rod being the scion of a long-established family on Norstrilia, and heir to the Station of Doom, which is the name given to one of these incredibly lucrative Stroon ranches. But Rod's inheritance and position within the society is under doubt because he has a telepathic handicap. By that I mean he lacks the telepathic skills which are normally used to communicate within the society. It is not a total disability, but his telepathic ability is erratic at best and much of the time non-existent. And so early on in the story, he's already lived through his childhood 4 times. They obviously have a radically different sense of time on this planet. But the story kicks off when he's put to a kind of coming-of-age test in front of a Lord of the Instrumentality to finally decide whether his telepathic skill is good enough for him to become a full citizen of the society, or if he needs to be culled and sent to what's known as the giggle death. So it's a pretty ruthless policy, but I guess that's the price you pay for living in a world of immortals. And that is how things start off. And it's just the first of many challenges that Rod has to face. And through a strange twist of events, he ends up attracting the jealous ire of a former friend. He gets himself into a very dangerous situation, and he desperately seeks a means to escape. And with the help and the advice of his supercomputer assistant, he finds himself playing the strewn futures market with radical results, in the process becoming the richest person in the universe and buying the planet Earth at a cost of 7,000 million mega credits. This point in the story, this scene, I think, is one of the most memorable and entertaining parts in the book, with some great humour. Having done so, for his own safety, Rod leaves Norstrilia behind and heads off to Earth. It's at this point in the story that the weirdness level increases even more so, and Rod gets involved in various adventures on Earth. He meets several eccentric characters, including a monkey surgeon and our old friend, the beautiful cat girl Camille, from the story The Ballad of Lost Camille. That's the last Smith story that I talked about. Since Rod's extreme wealth attracts all manner of unwanted attention, he travels undercover while he's on Earth by genetically altering himself into a cat person. And it's here on Earth that Rod learns of the plight and the oppression of the animal-derived underpeople. And this is a running theme that you'll be familiar with if you've read others of Smith's stories and novellas within this universe, such as The Dead Lady of Clowntown. Now, Rod ultimately goes on to play an important role in the destiny of the underpeople, and that becomes a big focus of the second half of the novel. So as you can see, a lot of the world building builds on characters and themes and events established in other stories that Smith wrote within this universe. And if you're already familiar with some of those stories, I do think they will enrich your experience while reading this novel. Often these stories come across as passing references within this book without any explanation or elaboration if you haven't read them before. I've already mentioned a couple of these, but there are many more. A few examples include the Menschenjäger killer robots from Mark Elf. They get mentioned. The Aberdingo supercomputer from Alpha Alpha Boulevard, and Norstrilia's legendary defense system in Mother Hitten's Little Kittens, to list just a few. I think if you haven't read any of these stories, these references will just go over your head. And while it's certainly not a requirement to read any of these short stories before reading Norstrilia, I would at least recommend reading The Ballad of Lost Camille before you read this, because it basically functions as a kind of prequel to the novel, and it features a number of the same characters. The Dead Lady of Clowntown is also thematically linked to this novel in its exploration of the plight of the underpeople. So I think that story is also worth checking out. It's also a fantastic novella in its own right. As for Norstrilia itself, there's a lot to enjoy in here, especially if you're already a Cordwainer Smith fan. It's a highly quirky story. It's full to the brim with weird and wonderful world building, memorable characters, and mind-boggling ideas that get thrown at the reader left, right, and centre. And there's some great moments of humour in here, which I really appreciated. It's a story that's rich in absurdity and irony. I will say, though, if there's anything to criticise about this book, the plot does feel a bit uneven at times. There's definitely a bit of a tonal shift between the first section, set on Norstrilia, and the second section of the book, when Rod leaves his planet, that betrays that this was originally published as 2 novellas that were then expanded upon and cobbled together into 1 volume. And the result is a narrative that is strange, unpredictable, and intriguing, but also quite uneven. And I would say that some parts are more compelling or entertaining than others. So I think this unevenness prevents this book from being elevated to the same level of greatness of some of his short stories, like Scanners Live in Vain or The Game of Rat and Dragon. I think, generally speaking, it's in his short fiction that Cordwainer Smith truly shines. That said, Norstrilia is still a unique and highly entertaining read that I had an enjoyable time with, and there are some genuine moments of brilliance in here. It's a weird and wonderful ride of a novel, and I give it 4 stars. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.